Welcome to Must Reads, a series of interviews with authors of recent books in the field of homiletics, sponsored by the Perkins Center for Preaching Excellence at SMU. I'm Alice McKenzie, and today my guest is Father Maurice Nutt. Reverend Nutt is a missionary preacher of the Redemptorist order. He holds a D.Min degree from Aquinas Institute of Theology in St. Louis. He teaches in their preaching academy there and is the author of Down Deep in My Soul, an African-American Catholic Theology of Preaching. And in the future, Father Nutt, I'd love to have you come back and we'll talk about that book, but you're so prolific that you have another book that we're going to talk about today. And I welcome you and appreciate your being with me today.
Thank you so much, Alice.
Sure. Well, I've invited you, as you know, to talk about a book that you have edited with two colleagues from Aquinas, Father Gregory Heille, who is professor of preaching and evangelization at Aquinas and director of their D.Min preaching program, and Dr. Deborah Wilhelm. She holds the D.Min degree in preaching from Aquinas, and she teaches there as well as at Loyola University in New Orleans. The book is entitled Preaching Racial Justice. And I have thoroughly enjoyed and found it very spiritually nutritious and challenging to work through the book. The book, I'll just say before we jump into some key themes, the book is it's like a smorgasbord. It's a feast with 15 essays by 15 contributors of varied ethnicities and to some degree denominations, although largely Roman Catholic, and lay people as well as ordained clergy. And there are three parts. Each part has 5 essays. The first part is the preacher's journey, which looks inward at how we need to look at, I guess, kind of the skeletons in our own closet. The other is Black Lives Matter, part 2. And the third is called Ancestors and Stories. So I'll stop talking now and ask you, Father Nutt, what would you say is the overall purpose for the book?
Well, we were very blessed to get a compelling preaching grant through the Lilly Foundation at Aquinas Institute to produce, actually it's the second part we did, which was my book, Down Deep in My Soul. We did 15 individual books with the first part of the grant. The second was going to be more of a collaborative effort. Greg Heille, as you heard, Dominican priest who's over the D.Min program at Aquinas, felt it so important to deal with the racism and the white supremacy in our nation. This book was made to be an intentional Roman Catholic response, although it is ecumenical, to racism that we could use both in the pulpit and in the classroom. So that was the intention of writing the book.
Well, that's certainly an important intention, and will overflow from Roman Catholicism to all Protestant readers as well.
Right.
Yeah.
The process of getting people, if I can just say, is that we were very intentional about making sure that everyone, as well as we could be, is inclusive, that we would have women, men, Black, white, other ethnicities, other denominations. So it's not all Roman Catholic. So even the makeup of the book is very intentional and deliberate.
Mm-hmm. Well, the process of working through it helped me to see that you really, it's like a beautiful kind of river and with banks. And the first sort of stop on the journey in section 1, I took to be focused on the idea that racism is personal, with the essay by Father Heille and his civil rights pilgrimage. What are your thoughts on that theme in that first section, in those essays?
In the preacher's journey, it talks about what is very important to the preacher's own entering into the question of race and racism and white supremacy in America. And you get a very diverse segment in those 5 chapters in that section. When you think of a woman like Reverend Dr. Deborah Wise Baker, who was on the front lines of the Ferguson riots happening due to the unwarranted death of Michael Brown, she talked about how, innately she didn't want to be there. That's what she said, but she was compelled to be there because that's the gospel in the street, in the marketplace, where she could be witness to the need for racial justice and to speak out, not only to be with the people in solidarity, but to also bring it back to her pulpit. But then you have a Greg Heille bookending that section, who said, as a white man growing up in Minnesota, having no real experience in interaction, I needed to take the journey. And what he did was a civil rights journey, which I would recommend to anyone who cares about deepening their understanding of race and racism. He went to Montgomery, Alabama. He went to the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. He was in Birmingham, where the 16th Street Avenue bombing took place, and it impacted him greatly. And he's a much better preacher and an ally for racial justice, having made that journey.
He includes a really helpful sort of calendar of the civil rights movement in that, and they're all his stops that he made on his journey.
Right.
Well, that was really helpful. And then moving to part two, the kind of key theme I took from that is, okay, first in part one, racism is personal, right?
Mhm.
In part two, then let's go from head to heart and talk about how it's also really, it needs to be heartfelt. It needs to involve empathy. So
Yes.
that's something you were going for in that second.
That was the section that I personally edited and worked with the 5 authors in that section. And everyone had, again, similar to the preacher's journey, a personal experience of their empathizing with racial justice. One being a young man, a young priest from the Caribbean, my Redemptorist colleague, Peter Heille, had to talk about how white people made him feel, as a person from the island of St. Lucia, well, you're not like those blacks. You're different. You're from the island. And it got him to start feeling like, well, maybe I'm superior. And he was taking on the very ethos of white supremacy as a black man.
Hmm.
And he had to come to realize that when people saw the color of his skin, he was treated just like anyone else. So that was really very stirring. Then you have a deacon like Michael Meyer from the McTushan diocese. He's a lawyer by profession, but also has his demon in preaching. He talks about how the best way to get white people to understand from the pulpit is to preach empathy,
Hmm.
to try to get them to, as best they could, experience what it feels like to be black and what they go through, and how can we be more empathetic in our understanding of racial justice. You have a very powerful uh, article by a chapter by Dr. Valerie Lewis Mosley, who talks about being a woman. And so it speaks about the womanist, black womanist experience of being a Catholic woman, black in the church, who has been silenced, and yet she has a word to speak that needs to be heard.
Right.
And talk a little bit about my chapter. My chapter was basically me lamenting about what we go through racism, and what I used the example of actually a black Catholic priest after the Trayvon Martin decision acquittal happened, how he was not aware. So I wasn't just like, let's beat up on white people for not understanding, but we have our own internalized racism that we do not even speak about. And so I wanted to deal with that as well.
That
And
was the
just
time he had nothing to say about
yeah,
that.
yeah, he had said nothing whatsoever to say about what happened. And people came to church, as I mentioned in my chapter. It was Easter Sunday packed. They were there, and I thought that should wake them up. Why is everyone here in the church is packed? They needed a word from him about
Yeah.
what injustice that took place.
Right.
So
Right. Hmm. I liked the essay that talks about the theological context for empathy. That is, Jesus is divine empathy incarnate.
incarnate,
That's powerful, and
yeah,
that's
yeah,
one of the takeaways, the gifts of the book, I think, to give us a theological context for it.
right,
And
right.
then when we move into the third chapter, it seems like I was kind of seeing and feeling figures from the past coming into the present, as the authors all, they either drew on the past to challenge their own assumptions now, or to give them encouragement in their challenge to racism.
One of the highlights or even hallmarks of Black spirituality is the role of the ancestors. And there's a real sense that the ancestors never leave us, but yet they very much are present and guide us. And I think each of the authors in that section, Ancestors and Story, talked about their own ancestral history with racism and or their lack of awareness or even bias. Like my co-editor, Dr. Deborah Wilhelm, she was great to be, my family comes from the West, and we really settled there and we were pioneers. And then she had to say, but, it was a land grant by the government, but the government took the land from the indigenous people. And her awareness to even name the tribe that the land in which she lives on, and to honor that. And it's all about epiphanies that she came to a realization with Father Dr. Vincent Pastoral talking about the role of Guadalupe and how she is a woman of justice. Guadalupe is a woman who was indigenous to the people, and she was both Indian and indigenously Indian, and yet she's Hispanic as far as Mexican, and how she speaks about liberation and freedom. And I was very moved by Dr. Anita Vincent's, giving us a sense of what the caste system of India is like.
Right.
And for anybody who's read the book Caste or seen the new movie by Ava DuVernay, Origins, it talks about racism is really rooted in a caste system of superior and inferior people. I mean, marvelous. And then my dear friend, Father Manuel Williams, I knew one of his grandmothers he speaks about, and just the wisdom of music and how the songs of spirituals were resistance songs that fortified to sustain them and help them to keep on working for justice.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's so many rich takeaways from the book. If you had to say pull out just a couple in terms of how you hope the book will impact your desired audience, what would they be?
I would believe that the impact of this book is for people to wake up and to be aware, to be empathetic, to understand that we need solidarity, and that racism is not a Black or a brown problem, but it's an American problem. The racism is the original sin of this country, and that it has always been a violent country founded on violence. And that if we can be aware of that in our pews, that we can begin to change in dialogue. How I want this book to be used, I want all students of preaching in seminaries to have it. It should be taught in the classroom. I also feel that it's a great resource for dismantling racism dialogues within congregations. I would hope that book clubs would take this up and discuss this within the context of parishes or among friends.
Right. Well said. So all I need to say now is
turn it around. There we go.
How about that? So Orbis Press 2023, Preaching Racial Justice. And you can see this interview on our Perkins Center for Preaching Excellence website. And I want to thank you so much, Father Nutt, for being with us today and for your contribution and that of your colleagues to this very helpful book. So.
Thank you so much, Dr. McKenzie. Alice, you're a great friend, and thank you for all the work you do in the Center of Excellence does to promote preaching. God bless you.
Appreciate it.